Discussing it all with us next, legal expert Evan W. Turk and also attorney M.Reese Everson, who's also a women's rights advocate. Both welcome to the programme. So, apps, the 21st century answer to everything, isn't it? But, Reese, can I ask you first, is this, at the very least, an empowering tool for vulnerable young women?
Empowering, not so much. I think the intention behind creating an app is positive in the sense that we're wanting to use technology to allow women to make their voice heard. And that sounds like it's a great idea on its face, right? But unfortunately, because it is consent and consent can be withdrawn at any given time, what we run into is the fact that, well, what happens if the person does consent on the app and then decides that she no longer consents, or maybe she's incapacitated and unable to continue to give consent? So it's the issue that we want to use technology to keep up with the times, but unfortunately, it doesn't do enough to actually protect a woman's right to choose and have autonomy over her body.
And Evan, does it form part of the solution, the technology, or is it a distraction?
I think it's an absolute distraction. There are certain things in life that technology is not supposed to be used for. I think relationships, especially intimate relationships, I think technology should be completely and totally removed. It causes unintended consequences and opens the gates for predatory litigation. It causes so many problems that you would not even want to even start to think about having an app like this.
Reese, why isn't the education working? We're supposedly in the 21st century, civilized society.
Here's the unfortunate truth is that we have not really gotten to what the core of the necessary lessons are. We're trying to use technology to protect women instead of teaching men that they need to respect the right of a woman's body to make a decision, to learn the signs of a person who's unable to give consent, to realize that a person who's silent may be uninterested in continuing with the act. And so we're not teaching men not to be predators. We're just teaching men try to cover yourself and protect yourself as best as possible so that this can't come back to bite you in the future. And while the app could be helpful if it were just for research purposes, in the sense of, you know, before the sexual encounter, did you consent? After the sexual encounter, do you continue to give consent? That's one thing. But at the same time, wanting to take this app into a court of law and say, oh, well, I didn't rape her because she gave consent. That doesn't work, because the consent could literally be changed within 10 minutes after giving it on the app, or you could coerce someone to give consent on the app. So it's not, you know, a clear-cut solution at all.
Evan, where is the education failing here?
I think there's a lot of confusion in the role of relationships right now because of technology. There are a lot of instant gratification apps, and the loss of a relationship is key to a lot of these problems that we're having. So to educate people is one thing, but to have a culture that, you know, promotes, you know, relationships and, you know, healthy ones is another. We have a culture right now where we have Cardi B singing a song that brings a huge confusion to the message. What are we teaching our children? And especially because of social media, children are especially vulnerable to raising the bar of thinking what is appropriate in order to be accepted in society. So I think technology is a big component, but society accepting technology and accepting this Me Too movement, this open society where everybody is okay with things, it's really causing a lot of confusion, especially for the younger generation.
I suppose, Reese, it's difficult, isn't it, for middle-aged politicians and policy formers to play catch-up with a technology that anybody under the age of 15 is leagues ahead.
Absolutely.
Well, so
it causes so many problems.
Yes,
Reese.
and no. We have middle-aged politicians who were alive and well during the ages of Woodstock back in the 70s, when free love was the theme and people were heavily self-medicating with opioids and all of those sorts of things, and actively participating in sexual intercourse with multiple partners that they oftentimes didn't even know. So I think that this age group of legislators actually, especially in the U.S., is more inclined to be familiar based on their experience in the counterculture. But the issue really is, and I hear, Evan, when you say, oh, well, culture is shifting and we're, WAP and singing about all sorts of sexually denigrating and just, basically making women sexual objects is so prevalent. But at the same time, everyone's not going to come from the same place of morality, religious viewpoint. And so we just simply have to teach consent across the board. And what is consent? We teach it in sexual education classes. It's like pouring tea on a person. Can a person consent to having tea poured on them? If they're passed out, they can't consent. If they're asleep, they can't consent. If they're drunk and they can't respond, they can't consent. And so these are the simple ways in which we need to address consent, because we're not going to always have a consensus as to what people agree to from a morality standpoint.
Evan, does it strike you that some of these ideas are formulated by men without actually making the point that the problem is men, that access to pornography that boys have when they're at school, that men are the problem?
I think that's, pornography and access to just about anything you want to see on the internet is a huge problem. It desensitizes people, and they think that the norm is something that I hope that it's not. And the reality is that education is just a component, but peer pressure and technology, and being a father myself, it's really hard to curtail what my children have access to. I could download every app, I could monitor what they are looking at and see what they're looking into online. But that doesn't mean that they're not looking at their friend's phone. It's just a very difficult era that we're in. And consent is a big one, but it has to be reinforced not only by parents, but by education and by society. And I think society is really sending a wrong message right now in what it is accepting as mainstream. And that's, one of the things that I think has shifted in my generation to, what's happening now for teenagers and 20-year-olds.
It certainly seems to change by the year, doesn't it? Okay, both, thanks very much for joining us
Scary.
on RT.
Thank you.
Thank you.